You're listening to Talking Law, the podcast where business owners just like you discover how to avoid legal landmines and build value using smart legal tips.
Hi, it's Joanna Oakey here and welcome back to Talking Law, a podcast proudly brought to you by our commercial legal practice, Aspect Legal. Today we are talking about recent changes to legislation relating to payment surcharges and what this means for your business. This is a really important topic because these new changes to legislation have just come into effect on the 1st of September 2017. And this now means that all businesses, small and large, that impose payment surcharges on credit card transactions are now limited in relation to what they're allowed to charge their customers. So this law came into effect for large businesses last year, and it's now being passed on to small businesses as well. Basically, what it means is that if you choose to pass on a payment surcharge to your customers, so that might be for a credit card fee or a processing fee, you have to ensure that you're only passing on what it actually costs you to process that fee. In the legislation, this is referred to as the cost of acceptance. So this means you can't pass on things anymore like admin fees, and you can't impose a flat fee that's in excess of what it actually costs you to process each individual payment. So it's a pretty significant change and definitely one that will force a lot of businesses to review their systems and policies so they've got everything compliant with this new legislation. It's really interesting to look back a year or so ago before these changes came into place for large businesses. We used to have the issue where there were many industries who were renowned for charging fees, like credit card fees, that were out of proportion to the actual cost that we knew those suppliers would actually on-pay to their merchants. I recall, for example, the airline industry, which used to often make their headlines when they charged a flat fee for a credit card transaction, no matter what the actual cost of the ticket was, and therefore the amount that was being processed as a credit card payment. So you could, for example, have a flight for $59 or a flight for $5,000 and you would still pay the same credit card fee, which of course for the average flight booking ended up being out of proportion to the actual ticket cost. So I guess that's why we've seen this type of legislation come into play. In the past, these costs were imposed and customers paying the fees wouldn't even question and didn't have the right to question it. But now it's making it more fair for everyone. But now this is impacting smaller businesses. The big question for those businesses is what changes they have to make, and can they still continue to impose flat fees for credit charge surcharges in order to make it easy, because they don't necessarily understand what their actual fees are, or because it's hard to impose costs or charges that relate to the actual amount that's being paid? Well, here's the answer. So if you are in business and charging a flat fee for credit card processing, take note. From the 1st of September 2017, businesses are still permitted to charge sort of a uniform fee, but it can't be in excess of what you're actually being charged. So say you have 3 different credit card providers. One of them charges 1%, one charges 2%, and one charges 3%. If the company wanted to have a flat fee, you could only charge 1% so that none of your charges are in excess of what you are actually paying out as the cost of processing these payments. The new legislation provides that you can pass on any permissible costs. Permissible costs is the name that is actually used in the new legislation. So you can pass on permissible costs that essentially are anything that you do or will incur as a business owner in order to process that payment. So for example, your actual merchant fees and your actual gateway fees that you pay to your third-party service provider. But the fees that you can't pass on now are your internal costs. those costs that relate to your staff actually processing the payments. So you can't charge an admin fee for the time involved or a processing fee. And I think in the past, a lot of businesses were passing that on to their customers. And so this legislation is just basically working to prevent that. So just repeating that, so it's really clear, you can pass on the actual costs that you incur from third-party service providers, but you can't pass on your internal costs. And if you are charging a flat fee, then that flat fee needs to be no more than you are actually paying. So therefore it needs to be no more than the cheapest merchant fee that you're paying. So if you're paying, say, a higher rate for Amex as opposed to Visa or MasterCard, you can't pick a flat rate that sits in the middle of the two in order for you to average it out. Right, so now we have that sorted, let's chat about what happens if a business doesn't comply with the new legislation. What if you haven't yet changed your pricing policy? The consequences for not complying with the new legislation are pretty notable. Basically, the ACCC, which is the Australian Consumer and Competition Commission, which is the body that has been given the powers to enforce this legislation, has got available to them a range of powers, and they can also issue infringement notices. And obviously, with any infringement notice, there's penalties associated, and the penalties can be pretty significant. They can be up to $10,800 for a company or $108,000 for a listed company. And the courts can also impose pecuniary penalties of up to $1.1 million for a company and $233,000 for an individual. That's a lot, isn't it? It's not just a small slap on the wrists. And obviously, in a lot of cases, that probably wouldn't be commensurate to what the business was passing on to their consumers. So it's really important for the businesses to review this new legislation. It's just not the type of thing that you want to get caught up in. It's so much easier to comply and stay on top of it from the outset when you get faced with any sort of penalty or court action or anything like that. It's also important for businesses to understand the impact of this legislation in relation to their supply contracts or their purchases, their expenses. If you're dealing with a supplier that is imposing a large fee, for example, for processing credit card payments, that supplier might in fact be in breach of this legislation now. So, there might be some opportunities for businesses to be paying a bit less than they were in the past. If you are able to clearly identify that surcharges are being applied that are greater or likely to be greater than what the actual charge to that business is, then I guess there's an opportunity here as well. So let's talk then about action items for businesses that are facing this new legislation for the first time. Here's what businesses should do moving forward. Firstly, you need to work out what the fees are that you are actually paying in payment surcharges to your credit service providers. Your merchant fees, your gateway fees, and any other third-party fees you're having to pay in order to process your customers' credit card payments. Remember that the big banks do actually have a responsibility to contact their customers and let them know what fees are able to be passed on. So if small businesses haven't heard yet, they should be hearing from their bank soon. And obviously, you can also be proactive and contact the bank, and they should be able to give you that direct information just to avoid any confusion. But also look at this as an opportunity for your business to review what it is paying. This legislation should give you a bit of confidence to ask the question. So if you're just paying these fees at the moment and you don't really understand what they're for, contact your supplier and find out. Because it might be the case of you clocking up all of these extra fees that you are now not required to pay and can't be required to pay. So that's it. That's our overview of this area. Just as a recap, in this episode, we talked about payment surcharges and the new legislation that now requires that businesses don't pass on more than they're actually paying. If you'd like more information about this topic, head over to our website at talkinglaw.com.au. Through that website, you'll be able to find a transcript of this podcast episode if you'd like to read it in more detail. And you'll also find details of how to contact our lawyers at Aspect Legal if you'd like help with any of the items we covered today. And finally, if you enjoyed what you heard, please pop over to iTunes and leave us a review. Thanks again for listening in. You've been listening to Joanna Oakey and Talking Law. See you next time.
Thanks for listening to Talking Law. Tune in next time for more smart legal tips and tricks to keep you clear of those legal landmines. If you want to get a download of today's show notes, head over to talkinglaw.com.au.
Are you looking for a top quality legal team to assist you in your organisation? Aspect Legal is an innovative commercial legal practice that specialises in providing fast and professional services for their clients. If you'd like to chat about how we might be able to assist you, simply head over to our website at aspectlegal.com.au to book in a time for a free discussion with one of our lawyers.